Okay, we're back and we're talking about attributional biases. Like, how come we make faulty attributions about other people's behaviors? One reason why we make attributional mistakes is because of the self-serving bias. If we ask people to write down a list of all their strengths and all of their weaknesses, their strengths list tends to be longer than their weakness list. When they write down strengths and weaknesses of someone who they like, the list of strengths tends to be longer than the weaknesses. And if we ask them to write a list of people who they don't like, the weaknesses list tends to be longer than the strengths list. It's as if we notice the things that are consistent with our expectations, and we don't notice the things that are inconsistent. So if we like the person, which hopefully we like ourselves, and then, a friend who we've been asked to write about, we tend to notice more of their strengths. Those are much more salient for us. If we're talking about somebody who we don't like, their weaknesses are much more salient for us. So that's a bias, right? It's self-serving because it tends to favor our position, right? So if we have made a judgment about a person already, we also notice other things that would be consistent with our judgment. That way it's more likely that our judgment will be correct, right? Because we keep finding more information about them that is consistent with what we've already thought. We also display what's called an egocentric bias. We tend to view our own behaviors or our own intent through a lens of, sort of better motives than we do others, and especially others who we don't like or others that we don't know, right? So if it's myself, or if it's one of my loved ones, I'll probably extend the egocentric bias to that category, that whole category. If it's a stranger or somebody who I don't like, I will tend to not extend the egocentric bias. So for example, if you ask a person what percentage of the household chores do they perform each week, they'll tend to overinflate the amount of chores that they do because they're egocentric. They notice the things that they've done. They're aware of whatever work that they've put in, and they think, well, that's most of the work, or it's a lot of the work, or it's, my part of the work, or whatever. But if you ask them if you ask that person's roommates, how much did that person actually do? The roommate's reported percentage of the individual is a lot lower than the individual's estimate. And that's because the roommates are aware of things that maybe the reporter should have been doing or left undone, or the roommates are more aware of what they themselves have done, right? The roommates are aware of, they're egocentric also, right? So they notice their own labors, their own efforts, their own contributions more than they notice their roommates. So both of them, when you're reporting your own household chores and when the roommates are reporting your household chores, the roommates are displaying the egocentric bias just as much as you would be. So everybody thinks that they're doing more work than they really can be, because if you sum the two amounts together, it hardly ever works out correctly. It usually exceeds 100% because everybody thinks they're doing more than they should be. Sometimes people are pretty accurate, and so the reporter will say, well, I do about 33%. And then the roommate will say, well, the reporter did 20%. And so we're all together got 53% of the chores being accounted for by one person. And right, like, how is everybody else getting the work done? It doesn't work out. If you put it down next to each other, you start to realize, okay, this can't be right. I can't be doing as much as I think I am. You must be doing more than I thought you were. And it's all because of the lens through which we observe our own behavior versus other people's behavior. Another reason why we make faulty attributions is because of that false consensus effect that we talked about before, where we think that there's some sort of agreement about what is good or desirable or should be done or whatever. And so when we say, I meet this new person, they're behaving in a way that is reminiscent of somebody else that I know, I may start to display a very stereotyped false consensus belief that all people like this person behaves like this, right? Like, we will start to make that kind of false consensus error where we think everybody in that group is really lumped together, because now I've met two and they're both acting like this. that kind of thing. And that it fuels so when we meet a second person who is behaving in a way that is consistent with someone like them that we've known in the past, it serves as information. But it also starts to really fuel that, oh, I can start just putting everybody who's even remotely like this person into the same box and assume that they're all the same and that they behave the same, like the same, act the same, all the things, think the same. How about our ability to judge internal states? Well, one of our biggest pieces of information about an internal state that another person might be experiencing is facial expressions. So I've linked in our classroom this quiz that I would like you guys to take. It's part of, it's just a fun little exercise for you to do. I'll give you a quick glimpse at it through linking it here. I don't know why I can't figure out how to get my web links not to be yellow. It's very annoying to have yellow web links. So it's this Greater Good magazine has posted this quiz, and your job is to test your emotional intelligence by reading facial expressions. And some of them you'll find are pretty easy. Some of them look, like are pretty simple, what we call pure emotions, like happiness or sadness. Others are mixed emotions where it's got some characteristics of, let's say, fear, sadness, and some aspects of disgust. And you're like, I don't know, is there a name for that? So it's kind of a challenging test. I actually got 2 of them wrong when I took it the last time. And I thought I was pretty good at this. I actually have done research on facial expressions, so I was kind of surprised that I got any wrong. So you might have fun doing it. So I went ahead and linked it in the classroom so you guys can play around with it just to see how it goes. I didn't make it a discussion or anything like that, just something for you to play around with. But that's one of those things where now my web link, once you visit it, it turns purple and at least isn't so glaring. So judging facial expressions is one of the biggest factors in judging another person's internal states. But there's a lot of nonverbal behavior that goes along with facial expressions, right? It's the combination of a facial expression plus posture or gesture or other nonverbal cues that can help us to really figure out what another person is experiencing inside of themselves. So you're aware that when you're nervous, you probably display some kinds of, for lack of a better word, sort of tics, right? Like little behaviors that you don't do consciously. You might catch yourself in the middle of it, realizing that you were doing it kind of out of nervousness. Like, I don't know, straightening your cuffs and your collar, or noticing that there's a little bit of lint on your clothing and picking it away, or suddenly your nose itches, or your upper lip, or you find that you're like looking off to the right all of a sudden when somebody asks you a question instead of looking at them, or you're blinking more often and you're like, why am I doing this? I mean, I might be nervous, but I'm not lying, right? There has been a lot of research on cues that people give out when they're lying. And I'll just give you the shortened version. You can read about the evidence and stuff like that in the text, but I'll just give you the short version. Different people give out different cues. And for different reasons, because sometimes people give out cues that could be construed as deception, but they're just basically nervous, right? If you've ever been to a job interview and you're not lying, but you're nervous, like you want the job, you want them to like you, you might display some of these tics that I've mentioned. So it could be just pure nervousness and not a sign of guilt. It could be that you're worried that the person's going to think you're lying. And so that's making you anxious, and that's making you display some of these behaviors. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why a person might blink frequently. I know I blink a lot more frequently when I'm not reading because I'm like trying to compensate for all the times I wasn't blinking while I was reading, looking at a screen. My eyes are all dry, and it's like, man, I have not blinked in like an hour. So maybe I'm blinking a lot trying to rehydrate my eyes. It's not because I'm lying. I'm actually physically like, oh, I can feel scratches on my eyelids. Right? There are a lot of reasons why a person might be sending out these little nonverbal cues. So how do we detect deception? Well, I thought I had it linked right here. It's probably going to come up in a second, and I'll go, there's my video. I have a little video that'll explain some of the little cues that like the FBI and the CIA look for detecting deception. But some really good pieces of information for me to share with you right now is anything that's like a change in the person's behavior. Are they speaking a lot faster, or are they speaking a lot slower than they usually do? Are they blinking more than they usually do, or are they blinking less than they usually do? Are they maintaining more eye contact or less eye contact than they usually do? So you'll notice I keep putting it against how they usually do. It's next to impossible to know whether a stranger is lying to you, because you don't know their normal base rate of these sort of behaviors that might reveal lying. So you have to use, you have to know the person in order to really be able to use these markers as signs of deception. I'm horrible at it, and I don't know my students well enough to know whether they're lying to me or not. And so that's why I have such harsh rules about, late work and stuff like that, because I don't want to even try and guess, and especially not in an online class where, all I have is your writing. Like, I don't know what's going on. So you know what? We're just going to apply these rules equally all the time to everyone. And that way I don't have to try and guess whether a person's trying to trick me or not, right? Because I don't know anybody well enough to know whether they're trying to trick me. Nonverbal behavior is really super important for, presenting ourselves in a way that we want to in the world, just sort of every day, right? I mean, if you think about it, there are things that you do to try and make sure that you're presenting yourself in the way that you want to. It could be that you're trying to look confident, or maybe you're trying to look non-threatening, right? Depending on your context, these could be completely valid. Either one of those could be completely valid goals, right? And so, there are things that you can do to help to present that, that image to the other person. I know when my son was wrestling, he was not the most confident of wrestlers. He was always just waiting to get pinned all the time. So I told him, and this was long before the research and the TED Talk where the woman said, I think her last name is Cuddy, put your hands on your hips in the Superman pose, and it actually raises testosterone. Yeah, that's actually been debunked, that it doesn't raise testosterone, but putting your hands on your hips opens your chest and squares your shoulders and makes you look more confident, makes you hold your head in a different posture. And next thing you know, you actually feel more confident. What I told my son to do that for is because that way, he looks more confident to his opponent at least, right? They see him standing over there with his hand. Don't cross your arms and fold in on yourself. Stand here with confidence and present yourself as a confident wrestler. And he was on a really good high school wrestling team. They tended to win state like every other year because of stuff. Anyway, I won't go into that. Anyway, and so I go, you have a threatening, singlet on anyway, because it has your school logo on it. And then, you're tall, which makes the shorter wrestlers nervous because they know you can grab them before they can get in on you. And then you're standing here looking confident. Like, get on the mat feeling confident. And you know what? By senior year, it was really working. But that's projecting confidence. There are other things that we do when we're trying to present ourselves to the world, right? We want to be perceived in certain ways. And so a lot of our nonverbal body language is intentional, but a lot of it is unintentional, right? Like my son wasn't crossing his arms because he wanted to look submissive. That's just how he looked, right? A lot of times we're giving off nonverbal cues that are contrary to how we see ourselves inside of our heads, right? And we don't realize that we're projecting to the rest of the world an impression of cockiness, or that we're giving off an impression of submissiveness, or anything like that. I'm sorry, I have to pause real quick. I'll be right back. My dog is barking and I'm home alone, so I have to go check on it. So hold on a second. All right, I'm back. There was nothing there. Why do dogs have to bark for hallucinations when you're home alone? I don't understand. Anyway, so where were we? Okay, so as I was saying, we oftentimes don't realize that other people are interpreting our nonverbal behavior that we don't even know we're doing, and they're using it as information about us. And so that's why it can be really helpful to become aware of your body language and, sort of, at least in certain circumstances, attempt to take control of it, right? Like choose to put your hands on your hips instead of crossing your arms when you're in some kind of athletic situation, or you're about to give a speech or something like that. Grab that presentation moment. Like try not to hold your hands in with your fingers interlocked and as if you're like praying while you're in a job interview. Because that makes you look really nervous, right? Like try and let your hands hang loosely. Try and appear really relaxed. A lot of self-awareness can make you more anxious though. So it's a tightrope that you walk when you attempt to take control of your everyday self-presentation, that's for sure. Here's my detecting deception video. So this is our former FBI agent, and he's going to break down some different, classic cases of deception and explain some of the key factors that help to make it really clear that that person was being deceptive. So I will see you on the other side of this video.